The universe is pretty cool. It gives us stars, oceans, and even you. And unlike the former, you are capable of questioning the world around you. Now, there have been countless others before you who were just as curious, and they managed to figure some things out. After a while, a bunch of other people tried it and got the same result, noting it down as a law that the universe operates under. This process of transcribing how the world works is called science. Now, science has gotten us pretty far, from hunting and gathering to the world we know today, but there are those who believe science doesn't tell the full story, that our universe works with completely different rules outside the realm of scientific reasoning. Maybe the stars influence our personality, or certain objects possess innate non-physical powers. These types of beliefs are representative of magical thinking, and often seem to directly oppose scientific fact. Even so, while many debate the existence of magic in this world, no one can argue about our fascination with it in fictional ones. The fantasy genre is incredibly popular, exploring worlds with unknown, mysterious forces and inexplicable creatures whose existence defies known reason. These worlds are full of endless possibilities. They're full of magic. Avid fantasy fans may notice a particular trend, that the majority of stories about magic take place in a medieval European setting. This is likely because the average person cannot imagine magic existing after the advent of modern science. If stories take place in relatively present time periods, they often distance themselves from science or technology to avoid this uncomfortable clash.
Now, Harry, you must know all about muggles. Tell me, what exactly is the function of a rubber duck?
The dichotomy between science and magic is seemingly uncompromisable, as magic is usually defined by the absence of science. It's so bad that we struggle to imagine the two together even in our wildest fantasies. However, there's no reason they can't coexist. In fact, they already do in this very world. Before we can try and reconcile these two, we need to define them, which is harder than it seems. If these past few years have taught us anything, it's that no one really seems to know what science is. And once you start to dig around, you can see why. These definitions are incredibly vague and, more importantly, all different. If you asked 100 different scientists what is science, you'd most likely end up with 100 different answers. Even more confusing, they would probably all be correct. This inability to come to a single consensus is a huge problem for sharing and explaining science and its discoveries. So much so that in 2009, a group came together to try and solve it. They came up with the following. Science is the pursuit and application of knowledge and understanding of the natural and social world, following a systematic methodology based on evidence. It's a good definition, but even then it is still flawed. For starters, in science the term nature usually refers to the universe itself and its laws. That means everything that ever was, is, or will be. The additional clarification of the social world then implies that socializing, society, and casual conversations as a whole are classified as unnatural, which is probably a victory for introverts everywhere. The truth is, whatever definition they made would likely still fall short. Science is a tree that contains an overwhelming amount of branches. If we take this analogy further, the roots of our science tree are grounded in logic. Logic is the study of correct reasoning, inferences, and rationality. It helps us determine whether something is true or false. But this is too simple. I don't mean the subject itself, but its outcomes. This binary distribution of the world fails to see its shades of gray. We need to add more complexities to account for this, and this is where mathematics comes in. It's often referred to as the language of science itself, and it allows us to determine the truth more specifically, with quantitative analysis. These two components are typically known as formal science. It's not exactly what you picture when you think of the subject, but it's as pure as science gets. If you have some starting problem or premise, you can follow an internal set of laws to get to the answer without even having to leave the page. As we head up the trunk of our science tree, we get to our natural sciences. These are your traditional subjects such as the physical science of physics and chemistry, up to the life sciences of biology. It's here where experiments utilizing the scientific method start to appear. All their results and theories are tested through systematic observations to characterize our world and determine what's the truth. It's for this reason that everything above formal sciences is called the empirical sciences. Finally, at the top of our tree is the social sciences, containing psychology, economics, political science, and countless others. These are usually referred to as the soft sciences, because despite also using the exact same systematic methods used in natural sciences, they rarely get a concrete answer. This is through no fault of the researchers themselves, but an intrinsic issue with social sciences. In general, as we progress higher in our scientific tree, the complexity of the problems rise. In experiments, we ideally try to manipulate one independent variable to see its effect on the other. In the natural sciences, we can usually be clever and reduce the number of interfering variables so the effects we see are related solely to our variable of interest. But as we approach the top, there are a countless number of variables needed to be controlled, and even likely more we've yet to realize. Even if it was possible to control some variables, it would create ethical problems, as the subjects in these fields are usually other people. Now, just as models are commonly used in science, this tree is just an overwhelming simplification for our purpose of understanding. In actuality, the branches of this tree would have to be merging from various portions of the trunk, as the scientific fields are always combinations of the various core subjects. Trying to cram all these together while somehow conveying the purpose of doing so and its methodology within a single sentence is a Herculean task. Because science denotes such a wide range of activities, a definition of it needs to be general. It needs the words systematic and evidence, and it needs to be simple and short. While the vagueness may make it less clear, it's a necessary component for an all-encompassing definition, especially if you want it to be short enough for people to read, or hopefully an interesting enough video to sit through. In my view, the APS definition does this the best. Science is the systematic enterprise of gathering knowledge about the universe and organizing and condensing that knowledge into testable laws and theories. Finally, we can get to the fantastical. So what is magic? Let's just get a rough definition out of the way. The best one I could find that didn't outright state magic as fiction was by Oxford Languages. It says magic is the power of apparently influencing the course of events by using mysterious or supernatural forces. So we've got two possible sources of magic, so let's explore both and see what we can get. We'll start with the easy one, and oddly enough, that's the supernatural avenue. Previously, I mentioned that nature is a broad term that refers to the universe itself and anything that exists within it. Supernatural then literally means beyond nature, or beyond the universe. Proving a supernatural existence is just as much an oxymoron as having an unimaginable thought. If we find ghosts, dragons, or leprechauns, they are no longer supernatural. Magic through supernatural forces then means it could never exist. If it exists, then it must play by our universe's rules, which science uncovers. If it came from another magical dimension at first, it doesn't then add magic to ours. It's like using a risk piece instead of a top hat in the Monopoly game, and getting upset when other players won't let you invade their properties. The rules of the game won't change because of the addition of a foreign player. But what if magic does exist, but its existence currently doesn't align with known science and is still a mystery? Then we go to the other section of our definition, that it's just some unknown or mysterious force, something we have yet to discover. This idea is best described by Arthur C. Clarke as magic is just science we don't understand yet. This can also be rephrased to give us another one of his quotes, that any sufficiently advanced technology, aka unknown science, is indistinguishable from magic.
Your ancestors called it magic, and you call it science. Well, I come from a place where they're one and the same thing.
Now, the problem with this definition is that it sets a doomsday countdown on the magical world. It implies that upon understanding, magic will cease to exist. This is more aligned with the magic of a party magician rather than a wizard. It's all just tricks, which lose their power once you know how they were performed. It's a god of the gaps explanation system, where magic only exists in the gaps of our scientific understanding, and once we fill the missing link, the magic is gone. This is inevitable, as science is constantly growing and filling in those gaps. If it comes across something it can't explain, it adapts and corrects a former mistake or adds an additional foundation. It's time for a thought experiment. If every time Harry picks up a wand and says Lumos, a bright light appears, that is just as scientific as any empirical experiment. It is repeatable, objective, and can be narrowed down to 3 independent variables, such as a wizard, a wand, and a phrase. The exact cause is yet to be determined what makes these conditions mandatory, but if we switch Harry with a muggle like myself, give Harry a sock instead of a wand, or have him say something else, no light will appear. If current science can explain it, then science is validated again. If the mysterious force responsible for the light is not brought on by any known forces, a new force will be named, and then science will absorb the previously considered magic into its library of knowledge. Science will then be updated and be closer to its end goal of a universal truth. It's a win for science either way, but now the mystery of the source is gone and Harry Potter is now science fiction instead of fantasy. Whether you define magic as forces of either a mysterious or supernatural basis, it perfectly opposes science. If science is the search for truth, The unknown and the unreal are its natural enemies. The direct progression of science is a war on magic, and every discovery is a loss of magical ground. With the goal of science being universal understanding, no magic will remain. Worse, the magic just didn't disappear, it was never there in the first place. When we discovered how lightning came about, Zeus didn't resign from his throne, he never ruled at all. Not only will magic no longer be part of our world, it never will have been. This is a little dark. It can make the world feel a little colder and less colorful, and in all honesty, I'd prefer to have a little magic in my life, so let's try and think this through. If all science is based on logical reasoning, and magic will always oppose science, you'd expect magic to be illogical. It should be fundamentally random and incomprehensible. But that's not the case. If you can think of any magical system, there are always internal laws and limits. If it can be explained or practiced in any way, it must have some organization. This leads to the heart of this entire video and the true definition of magic. The great fascination of magic is in the type of thought on which it was based. Magical thinking is not random, it has its own laws and its own logic, but it is poetic rather than rational. It leaps to conclusions which are usually scientifically unwarranted, but which often seem poetically right. Magic is explaining the world through poetry rather than objectivity. While both fields strive to explain the world, science tries to describe the world for what it is, while magic is more concerned with what it should be. It would be wrong to say the latter is entirely illogical. An example of magical logic can be seen with salt. Back in the day, before refrigeration, meat and other products would go bad quickly, but they noticed if they added salt, the decay would slow or even stop altogether. It's as if salt was warding away the effects of death itself. Taking this analogy a little further, it made sense that if the meat was protected, why couldn't salt protect us from the same malevolent forces and spirits that were believed to have caused death and rot in the first place? To this day, salt is still seen as a form of spiritual protection in many beliefs.
Salt? Cat's eye shells? He was worried. Trying to keep something from coming in.
Some may then view magic as an early science, and there is some merit in that thinking. After all, it was an explanation for an observed phenomenon. However, it then jumps to an additional metaphorical application. Magic is sometimes said to be a primitive form of science, but it is very much nearer to poetry than to even the most rudimentary of science, and like poetry, it relies extensively on the use of analogy. Unlike any scientific process, when the exact foundation for salt's preservation effect was discovered, the view wasn't corrected, nor was the analogy to salt's more powerful nature. Kurt Vonnegut describes science as magic that works, but sciences that are proven wrong don't prominently persist for centuries. It is natural to think of magic as a thing of the past, which must have withered to dust under the hard light of modern science and skepticism, but in fact that is not the case. Magical thinking is still deeply embedded in the human mentality. Magic has grasped the public's mind despite the presence of science because they do not compete for the same job. Magical thinking is a separate perspective to view the world, a way of thinking that's incredibly intuitive and follows an emotional logic dictated by metaphors and analogy. Magic is less of a learned science and more of humanity's innate reasoning method, our natural first guess. Superstitions are instinctive, and all that is instinctive is founded in the very nature of things, to which facts skeptics of all times have given insufficient attention. At the end of the day, humans are a social animal hardwired for emotional decision-making. When the answer to a problem is unknown, it is difficult to think rationally, but using past experiences as an analogical reference can give us ideas for possible solutions. We may eventually learn the truth and figure out an answer, but we can't silence our initial gut feelings. Scientific knowledge will never completely overwrite these instincts because we evolved them for a reason. We use a magical thinking style because we live in a magical world. We live in a world where invisible, unbreakable forces tie us all together, where opposing sides constantly war with each other, always drawn together yet somehow maintaining a delicate balance. Sometimes a guess is right. Magic is not some fairy tale or some hidden universal secret. It shouldn't depend on the absence of science and should exist on its own. But that doesn't mean they have to be mutually exclusive. Even though our world is described by science, it can still be full of magic. In this intersection, dreams exist. It is as above so below, water has memory and there are strange, seemingly inexplicable creatures. Pushing these ideas further can create fantastical worlds where we can explore them to their fullest, but that doesn't mean we can take all the lessons we learn back here. We live in a world described by science but still full of magic. Maybe without the magic you thought you knew, but the one you already had and we will all continue to search for more of.